So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to another battle replay, and this is going to be something of an interesting replay to do actually, because there have been some pretty substantial updates since the last time I did a Silmarillion video, and indeed the whole structure for how you even get onto the mod has now changed. They've got their own little GUI and there are engine improvements actually to Silmarillion, and I believe this is mainly with a view for the campaign focuses that are to come, because the campaign is really starting to gather a bit of momentum for Silmarillion, which we will keep a bit of an eye on, because I will be covering a little bit of that when the time comes, I hope. But for now, this is going to be more of a standard battle, and indeed, larger scale siege battles like this are a little bit rarer in Silmarillion, it seems. Most of the things that I've shown tend to be more pitch battles, because Silmarillion has gone through sort of smaller, more consistent updates, for example, than Reforged, but obviously this does mean that there's a lot of testing and a lot of tweaking, which means it does have a tendency that pitch battles tend to take priority there with all of the changes that happen, and larger set-piece battles like this are run a little bit more rarely, but this is going to be such an example. And indeed this is also going to be a situation where the forces of evil are on the defence. Specifically, this map is called Ulfang's Palace, so it's going to be the House of Ulfang flanking an Angband army in the middle here, who are going to be doing the defensive work, and of course all of the attackers wait outside as well. This map, I think I've done like an older version of this map in the past. I don't know if that was actually on Reforged or whether that was on Silmarillion actually, but the overall layout seems familiar to me, and that hill in the background with the structure on it also does, so I'm not sure, I may have done so, but there have been several updates that have passed since then. Now, one thing that you will notice as well, which is immediately relevant, is the fact that the Easterlings have been split into two separate factions, the House of Boar and the House of Ulfang, of course, to represent the good-aligned and evil-aligned variations on what the Easterlings are. So the House of Boar are going to be marching with the forces of light today, and we have Batu playing as them. So the Salamandrine Guard, they have remained, functionally anyway, in terms of what they're supposed to do, relatively unchanged ever since they were added into the game. They've got their fiery projectiles, and they're actually a very good anti-cavalry unit as well. Pretty good cavalry and monster hunting units, as well as being, you know, pretty good harassment units like every good horse archer is going to be. But in a siege battle like this, horse archers do have a tendency to be a little bit more difficult to utilise. So it's going to be standing in stark contrast, really, to the more open battles that we've seen of late in Silmarillion. In amongst them we have the Halberdiers of Lothlan. Obviously Halberdiers, polearms in general, are a little bit rarer in Silmarillion, so when you can take advantage of them they can be very, very potent indeed. And the Halberdiers here in particular, because they also combine that with armour piercing, which is going to be incredibly useful against the Angband army in the middle of the defence today. Actually, I believe this is a 4v4 siege, but anyway, Angband are in the middle. So yeah, the Halberdiers of Lothlan will be especially potent against them, I would suggest. Just in behind we have the Axemen of Lothlan as well. One-handed Axemen have a tendency to trade in a little bit of survivability for a little bit of damage. However, the House of Ulfang have a tendency to do the same thing en masse, so I think the extra damage will be really useful against some of the lighter units perhaps that their fellow Eastern men are going to be trafficking in today, but more on that later. More of those Halberdiers. Just in behind we have a skirmishing archer as well, the Wanderers of Thargelion. So that's going to be another interesting thing, because obviously in the past the Easterlings only really had access to one archer, but now that they have been split into two separate factions it's going to be a little bit different. The Wanderers of Thargelion, however, are still relatively light as far as archers go, so it'll be interesting to see how they get on. But the House of Ulfang and certainly Angband are not really designed for long-range protracted skirmishes anyway, so perhaps the light armour won't be too much of a concern for them. We have a ballista crew back here, manned by a unit of Warband of Lothlan, which are a pretty basic unit of spears in the grand scheme of things, but they do have big shields. But unlike some other artillery crews, they're not going to be quite as impressive in melee, but they can still hold their own reasonably enough. And obviously that ballista is still going to be very handy as well. Detachment of the Halberdiers of Lothlan, so that's a smaller half-strength unit, but also half the price. More Axemen and a catapult as well, so two artillery pieces, both manned by Warband of Lothlan. Interesting to see how they get utilised. Obviously no walls to crumble, but artillery is always good for preventing the defenders from resting on their laurels in choke points too heavily. Plenty of those Axemen as well. Meanwhile, marching down through the middle we have another human faction in the House of Haleth, played by I'm going to call him Alf, anyway. We have the Sweardebrothia of Thargelion, a relentless unit, so that means they cannot be staggered while they're fighting, which is really the thing that sets them apart. Medium infantry is what you could look at them as. I mean, they're classed as heavy infantry, and certainly for the House of Haleth they are. But relative to some of the heavier units that you'll see from Angband or perhaps one of the Elven factions, the Sweardebrothia do lack a little bit in terms of heft there. But that relentless trait does make a big difference, because it means on the kind of longer fights that they're intended to do or be a part of, they're going to be able to land more hits because they're not being staggered, so that means they're going to be able to do more damage, even if they themselves are maybe not quite as bulky as some of the more impressive units of line infantry that Silmarillion has to offer. Nonetheless, they also represent, far and away really, the most solid front line that the House of Haleth can field. They are more of a hit-and-run style faction in terms of much of what they have, but they can act as a good supporting faction in a siege like this as well. But if it comes down to their own pure martial might, they may struggle a little bit against the likes of Angband if it comes down to a straight pit fight between the two of them. The Dowarwada of Ethelbrandir, one of the bodyguard units that the House of Haleth have at their disposal, very strong javelins, and then they're strong in melee as well, one of the stronger melee combatants that Haleth have to offer. But again, if it does come down to a straight conflict between themselves and the equivalent bodyguard units from Angband or the House of Ulfang, they may start to struggle a little bit there. We also have some Huskarlar of Thargelion, obviously throwing axes. This is where the support nature of the House of Haleth can really come into play. If, again, the defenders get too comfortable in a choke point, the artillery from the Eastlings we've already seen, but also the throwing projectiles of the House of Haleth can really punish them for that, so we'll see how that goes. The dismounted Mardrout of Malduin, another high-tier unit of javelins this, and obviously again they have slightly bulkier armour than much of what the rest of the Paladin have to work with as well. The dismounted variant, though, they're a relatively small unit also, which can be a little bit of a concern, but plenty of damage to be done. Ulfedin of Ethelbrandir are an interesting kind of unit because they have a lot of mass and they tend to mulch their way through enemy formations, but they can also end up surrounding themselves as a result of that, and that's where their lower defensive values, once their hit points are expended, come into play. The classic berserker unit, really, in the sense that they will be very damaging while they're active, but as soon as they start to fall, they will melt away pretty quickly. So timing is going to be everything with regards to committing them, but they are also one of the combatants that even the likes of Angband are going to be pretty worried about facing. And then at the back, another unit of the Dowarwada, so that's an expensive thing to bring two of them, but it is also one of the better units that you can field as the Paladin in this sort of situation. More Mardrout, and then there's some hidden units around as well, but that's not too surprising. Paladin trafficking quite a few of those, so we'll see more of them show up as the battle goes on. Now, moving on to the third attacking army, we have the Green Elves of Ossriand, another faction which is maybe at its best in more of a support capacity. They are a little bit more lightweight than many of the other Elven factions the game has to offer, but their range damage is very, very impressive, and more long range than throwing projectile that we saw from Haleth. There's a hidden unit there, which is probably one of the Gellian units. Hunters of Rathloriel, so this is obviously a javelin unit combined with a spear. Decent utility on them. They're not going to be match winners because they're not going to be able to do the level of damage at range or in melee, really, that's going to be like really outstanding, but it is going to be very useful as part of a combined arms effort, and of course any cavalry the defenders may want to sally out with is going to have to be careful of them. Skirmishers of Rathloriel, slightly chunkier than the Gellian archers, obviously the lightest archers that Ossriand have to offer. Skirmishers of Rathloriel a little bit more capable of getting into a slinging match with enemy archers. It's still not the best modus operandi for Ossriand to be getting involved in such things, but their damage can see them through as long as they're not going up against some of the really heavy-duty archer factions, which I don't think there are going to be any on the defence today. The Earthen Tower represent their... Oh, this is also Donal Trump. But yes, this is also going to be the Earthen Tower. This represents really the best skirmishing archer Ossriand have, but it is also worth saying they're pretty expensive, and even they are not ideal in this regard. And you don't want to be losing them in a skirmish fight either, because they also represent a very potent melee force when all is said and done, with those two-handed axes. Obviously a nice amount of armour-piercing damage to go along with that, and also a couple of units of the Mythern and Tol Galen. This is probably the most impressive unit of dedicated infantry that Ossriand have, purely because, well, they're going to be because they're the most expensive, but also those maces, the armour-piercing sting they offer is going to be useful against the likes of Angband today. And they do represent a pretty good defensive unit as well. Though defensively, there is one unit that perhaps can overcome them, and that's the Kinsmen of Denethor. They do, of course, lack the armour-piercing and the slightly more damage-dealing edge of the Mythern that we've just seen, but they are a little bit bulkier, and it is perhaps a slightly safer place to put your general, which indeed that's where the Green Elf general is. And Spear Host of Galleon as well. Two-handed spears, phalanx unit again, but maybe not as effective in terms of damage dealing as halberds. They can be outranged by pikes as well, though I don't believe there are going to be any pikes on the defence today, so they can be used effectively, but they're also very vulnerable to arrow fire indeed. And finally, by far the heaviest faction on the attack today, we have the House of Feanor, played by Lord of Belagost. Some upgraded defenders of Aglon, a very different focus compared to the Elves of Ossriand next to them, but they offset one another very nicely actually. More damage dealing and support focused from Ossriand at range, and then bulk in melee and from afar from Feanor. And the defenders of Aglon represent really high base damage. They're going to be very useful, particularly against the House of Ulfang, I think, but even against Angband with their sheer baseline quality. Rangers of Halavorn, so this is going to be, I believe they're the armour-piercing javelins that Feanor have at their disposal, so that's another useful supporting tool that can be sent forward. They're decent in melee, but of course Feanor are going to be primarily relying on other units to do the heavy lifting for them in melee. Speaking of which, we have the fully upgraded Footmen of Amras. It's fairly expensive to fully upgrade them like this, but they become one of, if not, depending on what you're prioritising, the best unit of mainline line infantry the game has to offer, and even the likes of Angband will struggle against the sheer defensive scores that the Footmen of Amras have. Really though, where Feanor do stand out is in their heavy cavalry. The Mounted Company of Carufin are a good choice because even if they cannot be used as the cavalry hunters their primary function is, they can still be used as javelins if if there is nothing else to utilise them on. And it's one of the reasons why I do like mounted javelins when you're on the attack like this, because they have a variety of ways in which they can be used effectively. There's a lot of Footmen of Amros, 2 Mounted Company of Carufin. There's also the Archers of Amrod here, the heavy archers for Feanor, very good at skirmishing with the enemy. And again, it offsets, it's the heavier, more defensive focus in comparison to Ossriand's lighter, more damage-dealing focus at range. So again, they offset one another really rather well. Footmen of Amras, and then there's a few units further back here as well, some more rangers as the trees pop in, Archers of Amrod, and then also another catapult, again manned by unupgraded Footmen of Amras, but they're still going to be certainly competent enough to keep themselves alive for a decent amount of time. Now then, for the defenders, we have a huge blob of Leech's army here playing as one of the Ulfang forces today, fighting on home turf, the evil-aligned Easterling. So we'll go through what we can, but it's going to be easier to go through the other Ulfang army later. You can see here there's the Thanes of Ulfang with a hand axe and a shield, so they're obviously going to be pretty decent at dealing damage with that one-handed axe. There's also in and amongst here the Hroatani Tribesmen, which I believe are the throwing axe unit. There are the Despoilers of Dor Caranthia, obviously the Falksmen are the things which really set Ulfang apart, a nice aggressive unit of infantry, high charge bonus as well, which is going to be interesting to see how that works as a defensive force, because they're going to need to really force an engagement when the attackers get close, I think, to get the most out of that charge, if they intend to do such a thing. Maybe save it for later and maybe try and break out and sally forth. Sons of Ulfang are the strongest unit that the House of Ulfang have to offer. We can't really see them in and amongst all of the rest of these units here, but I'm sure we'll get a closer look at them in the other army, because I'd be surprised if we didn't see the Sons of Ulfang in each one. Elf Hunters of Dor Caranthia is an interesting kind of unit. We'll see what they're all about as well, a new unit for Ulfang, but they are also manning the Ballista here, and also the Fangs of the Faithless, which is the archer unit that the Eastlings always had, and they have gone over to Ulfang, of course, being the Faithless that they are. But yeah, more Elf Hunters, which is a 2-handed spear unit by the looks of things, but hopefully we'll get a better look at the other Ulfang, or the Ulfang units as we move through the rest. Oh no, it may very well actually just be a 3v4 by the looks of it. Angband's army is just a little bit more spread out, played by Stewie. Thralls of Angband represent really the long range option Angband have. It's more of the token effort archer really, so that they can engage at long range if they need to, but of course crossbows are how they prefer to do their long range killing. Spearguard of the Iron Crown, also a very heavy unit of defensive spears, obviously a wall of black iron that the enemy can crash against. Though I will say, in all of their various different ways, all 4 of the attacking forces can overcome the heft of Angband here. Angband overall of my Silmarillion replays have probably been the most effective of all the factions, I think. And they do have some very scary stuff at their disposal, but we'll see. Uroloki, one of the very scary units, and they're very, very good against lightly armoured targets. Their breath weapons work well against the more lightly armoured, so Feanor will do okay against them, but all three of the others, in particular Ossriand, I think, will be vulnerable to them if Ossriand gets into the kill zone. Speaking of which, another unit which is effective against the lightly armoured, as most of the fiery projectile units are the Iron Drakes of Angband. Obviously they don't have the same monstrous presence as the Uroloki, but they are perhaps almost, they are, I suppose, more simplistic to use because you don't have that pressure of trying to use your monstrous unit to its fullest. We also have the Iron Shod Ravagers, so this is where some good units against heavy armour come into play, and they will find themselves very much at home against the likes of Feanor. Speaking of which, the Tormentors of the Iron Crown will as well, being Macemen. In terms of baseline quality, the Feanor infantry probably has them just about beat, but that armour piercing does level the playing field a bit, and they have a huge shield value as well, so they can overcome, or at least mitigate, many of the arrows that are going to be coming their way. Iron Shod Halberdiers, so we've already mentioned how important Halberdiers might be. Phalanx units are few and far between, but Angband do have access to one, and the Iron Shod Halberdiers have always been a very dependable unit for them. And also the Iron Shod Arbalists are here, a nice unit of crossbows, of course, which can be used to devastating effect, as any Medieval 2 focused mod will be. Bulldogs of Angband are the high tier unit of infantry that Angband have available to them. Very strong they are as well, one of the best examples of this type of unit in the game. I don't know if we're going to be seeing the Feanor one. It might have been skulking around in the trees, but if not, they will be the strongest unit of their type on the field today. More Spearguard of the Iron Crown, and I mean, just having a look at this, we can see how numerous the Angband army is, even when outnumbered by a whole army. In terms of individuals on the field, Angband are certainly helping to level the playing field a little bit there. And there's also some Iron Shod Legionaries in here as well, which have had a little bit of an overhaul as well. I think this is the unupgraded variant of them. Thralls, more Halberdiers, and finally, we'll go through the other Ulfang army under the command of Melkon. Again, Ballista, the Elf Hunters of Dorkaranthia, get a closer look at them here, and again, yeah, two-handed spear unit, perhaps not too dissimilar to the Gellian spears that Ossriand have, only maybe with a bit more armour. Croatani Horse Archers, so they're not going to be able to defeat the Salamandrian Guard 1-to-1, but they are going to be cheaper, of course, and maybe sheer numbers can overwhelm them, but interesting to see how any sort of sally out goes, considering you would suggest between the House of Boar and Feanor that the cav superiority should be for the attackers to claim. Another Ballista as well, plenty of artillery here, going to be interesting to see how this plays off against each other. Despoilers of Dorkaranthia once more. We also have the Ravagers of Himring, the most entry-level shock infantry unit. Obviously their defence is certainly questionable, but we'll see. Croatani Foragers as well, so this is going to be a Javelin unit, barbed spears. More Despoilers of Dorkaranthia, plenty of those Foragers. Got more of those Thanes of Ulfang. And then over here, more Thanes, more Marauders, and more Fangs of the Faithless. Interestingly enough, I don't believe there are... Oh no, wait. Are the Sons of Ulfang over here? Yes, they are. This is, of course, the highest tier of Folksmen that the House of Ulfang has at its disposal. Natural armour piercing on them as well. And the Marauders of Himring are here too. So I'll make a little bit of a cut as the attackers manoeuvre their way into position and the defenders decide where exactly they're going to make their stands as well. And we'll rejoin when the first ranks are clashing. So a little bit of back and forth right from the start here, as these Croatani Horse Archers were trading a little bit back and forth with the Salamandrine Guard, who got the first few shots off actually, and this is where having the artillery up on that hill didn't help them, but again, if you can't kill off the entirety of the artillery crew, it's really a bit of a moot point. But interestingly, the terrain and the bit of cover that it does offer does mean that the Salamanders are not really going to be able to lay down their superiority at range, albeit we do of course have the House of Boar's own archers now in the Wanderers of Thargelion. Foot archers in general are going to be far better at doing this kind of job anyway, although I would still suggest that sending forward the Halberdiers first and foremost may be a little bit of an error, considering that arrows are going to be one of the best ways you can deal with polearms. Rigswear of Brethor moving forward are one of those hidden units that the Haladin can traffic in. They don't have shields, which is a little bit of a concern for them when it comes to survivability, but yet another one of those throwing projectiles that the Haladin can utilise. Although, interestingly enough, for now, it does look as though they are going to be left to their own devices going through the middle here. Some of those projectiles going way over, so not ideal, but they are still managing to hit, and killing off a few of these halberdiers is definitely worth their while. If the odd iron-shod legionnaire is to fall as well, that isn't the worst thing in the world. And the rigs where they can function in melee, so you don't want to lose them for nothing, but generally speaking, if you are going to do damage and overpower even the iron-shod legionaries, I think you are going to be far better off utilising your javelins first and foremost. And of course the defenders, being outnumbered by an army such as they are, these are the kind of losses which they can't really afford to sustain, even if they aren't perfectly executing the throws the rigs were. They are still doing a decent amount of damage there. Going to move in and try and get a slightly better angle this time. Is Alf. If you get too close though, then the counter attack is on. And as with most things Haladin, they do lack a little bit in the old survivability department. Ossriand so far not really moving forward with any great haste, and Feanor slowly crushing in from the side. I mean, Feanor could, if they wanted to, go right down here to this river estuary and cross over and try and attack from this side as well, but that will take them quite a while, and considering that the attack is already slightly underway at the very least elsewhere, although it does look as though the fight has cooled off a little bit once again. Ballista starting to fire, and also Wanderers of Thargelion in a pretty good position. I mean, you can definitely see what Melkon is thinking here, setting up his front line like this, but if he's going to take free damage from archers, and also the Ballista is probably an even bigger problem for them when they're in such dense formations. None of these units on the front line are their most important ones, but numbers are still going to be very key if they are to, again, withstand that army advantage that the attackers do have. Skimming over the top of many of those units, but still killing off a decent number of them. And yeah, this is definitely going to be enough to get them to move, as much as they could maybe try and justify taking arrow fire from the front, given all these units are shielded. If not, you know, their armour isn't the best, but the shields will do a good amount of the heavy lifting. Ballista bolts are a different matter entirely, and even then the attackers, even if they're only going after marauders of Himring like this, it's still damage that's probably worthwhile to do, given that edge that they do have. A lot of those shots are falling short, however. Salamandrine Guard getting into position as well. That was a nice hit. The Salamanders do begin firing. What are they going after? Their projectiles a little bit more key, and yeah, they've been trying to hunt down this Ballista pretty much since the very opening stages. We missed the first few volleys on them up on that hill over there, but they are intent on not allowing Ulfang to get their own artillery into a good position. And the Elf Hunters, unfortunately for Ulfang, not going to be the best at taking arrow fire, not shielded. The armour looks okay for Ulfang standards, but again, not the best for them. But that isn't exactly strange when it comes to Ulfang's units, so it shouldn't be seen as too much of a surprise, I don't think. These rigs were moved back a little bit, still, for the time being, just the occasional foray forwards with some javelins to soften them up for later. But it is interesting if the Haladin will be left to their own devices against Angband, though Angband have also sent across some units to this half of the city, which I think this is going to be where we do start to see an awful lot of ground gained in the latter stages by the attackers, just based on the armies that are over here. That combination of Feanor and Ossriand, in theory, should be very, very potent. The only thing really lacking is the fact they are both Elven factions, so numbers may be a bit of an issue once they commit. They are going to have to hope that they don't have to rely on committing too many waves forward. There are a fair number of just dead units in behind here, which I can only assume is a result of the Green Elves. A little bit of reprisal perhaps now with the defensive artillery trying to make some long shots, but fortunately for Ossriand, those are all going to miss. All of the heavier units a little bit further back, and that makes sense. Feanor to do the heavy lifting early with a lot of the Ossriand skirmishers, and then if you need to, another wave comprising of Ossriand's infantry units to try and finish them off. This is a little bit worrying as well for the Haleth. We mentioned in the deployment phases that these fire-spitting units are going to be good against the lightly armoured, of which the Haleth certainly count. So they're in a pretty nasty position, if they have of course been noticed. As look as though the Haleth are starting to make their way forwards now. I'm a little bit surprised about the lack of urgency from the elves, more so than anything else, because I mean, the House of Boar already very much engaged in a back and forth with Ulfang that they're actually doing very well in as well. I mean, this kind of warfare, the House of Boar does have the heavier units of the two factions that previously comprised the Easterlings. As we can see here, I mean, the Hroatani Horse Archers, many of them actually did die up on the hill anyway, even with the cover, so now they don't have any of that cover. Against heavier factions, the Wanderers of Thargelion probably wouldn't have had this kind of success in this kind of setting, but the situation being what it is, they have done very well. And this is the right way to approach things. As soon as you get closer, that's where all the throwing projectiles of Ulfang will come into effect, and that will be far more worrisome for them. Hunters of Lothland moving around, so some javelin action as well for the attackers, though throwing projectiles are fairly commonplace in Silmarillion as a whole. The differentiation between armour piercing and non-AP but longer range means that most factions have at least options in this regard. Skirmishing between throwing projectiles is going to be more commonplace in this submod. Ballista to ballista, perhaps? I mean, we are going to see an artillery duel. There's actually two ballistae over here as well from Malcon, but the terrain is going to get in the way of both of them, so they're going to need a good amount of good fortune if they are to have any success there. There were units skulking through the tree line over here. I mean, you can see a grilling was received, and that was probably from the Urolokia right here, so they've managed to force the Green Elves back from this position, which was almost certainly what was doing the chip damage over the cliffs here. Feanor's starting to menace the front line a little bit, and then there's the small matter of their other detachment over here. One thing we did miss in the deployment phase actually are the Accursed of Alqualonde. They of course have got that relentless trait as well, which much of the Haleth do, though they do so at the kind of level you would expect of a high tier heavy elven swordsman, so the damage they can do is very substantial. And they should be very good against most of the Ulfang units as well. Angband better placed to deal with that sort of thing with many of their units. Another one moving forward, but yeah, Feanor splitting off 2 and 2, though with one of their armies probably not enjoying the support from Ossriand, so it's going to be this engagement over here which I think is going to be more important. The catapult as well, with the defending artillery already tied up on the other side. Going to start to see the initial volleys from this. What are they going to go after? I mean, those units on the front line, Spear Guard. Spear Guard combined with Halberds, I mean that's a worthwhile thing to go after. The Halberds do represent, after all, the best thing for really keeping Feanor at arm's length here, even though they are basic in terms of the tier they occupy. Just in behind, Despoilers of Dor Caranthea moving backwards, not wanting to get hit. Yeah, the terrain is, they're trying to keep their artillery behind cover, pretty much every faction here, but in so doing they are making the hits a little bit harder to land, but what will Angband do in the face of this new threat? Can they afford to move their units even? Bit of support coming in from the Archers of Amrod, I believe that is as well, yes indeed. So Feanor starting to turn up the heat a little bit. The Haleth still not quite ready to commit to a full-blown advance in the middle, although the dismounted Dragoons are in range. They are once again going after this little clutch of units. Again, it's minor chip damage at best, but it does at least set the table for when the Haleth do move in. Have After all, their own survivability is not really up to the same sort of level as the kind that Feanor enjoy. Wanderers of Thargelion, several units of them, banking their shots over this hill. Croatani foragers will be pretty weak against that sort of thing. They are shielded, but no armour at all to speak of. Marauders of Himring, also fairly weak to this sort of thing. And depleted archers, you may as well try and use all their ammunition now. Soften the enemy up as much as possible. And that is what this battle has the feeling of. They will try, the attackers, to really hammer home that army advantage by peeling away as much of the manpower as possible with their ranged units before then moving in with what they will hope to be overwhelming force. Though if they are dependent on these archers doing heavy amounts of damage, they may be a little bit disappointed, because so far it's been little bits here and there. The thing is though, if you're the defenders in this situation, it's not a huge amount you can really do other than just try and position yourself correctly and mitigate the damage by having your heavier units out in front. Just because the amount of enemy archers is substantial enough, and you don't really have the ability to skirmish with them as Angband or Ulfang. This is where the Iron Crown units will start to come into their own, however. Meanwhile, again, Spearguard of the Iron Crown being forced backwards by the Archers of Amrod. Again, terrain can be their friend here. Angband do have their own archers over here, so they may actually be returning fire again. But again, much like with the horse archers on the other side, Archers of Amrod really are one of the very best heavy archers at skirmishing that Silmarillion has to offer. So I wouldn't imagine it's going to go too well for them. But oh well. Back go the Spearguard. Croatani tribesmen are waiting with malicious intent. Again, the one-handed Falxes, which Ulfang are also known for. Of Amras moving forward slowly in a bit of a minesweeper roll. Thanks to Faithless, and this artillery is in a pretty good position. They're already firing, interestingly enough. I don't know if Leech is going to be able to hit anything with his artillery. They do have the Oathsworn though, so that is the bodyguard unit Feanor, so are they going to be able to hit something with that? Managed to get one elf from that. To be a host of Galleon, I mean, not the worst thing that the attackers could be losing, so I don't think they'll be too concerned, and the chances of hitting from that far and that angle are limited enough, I think, that the attackers can afford to hold their current position. So still, we're in that calm before the storm phase, really. The first melee engagement, and unsurprisingly, really, it's going to be the House of Boar who have been the most involved attacker so far. Although I'm not sure this is really the best of ideas moving forward with only a small amount of your units. I think you need to have more of your units on station ready to prevent all of these, or as many of these, projectile units from doing their thing as you can. Those Croatani foragers in a good position to shoot into the side of these units, and of course the Halberdiers will be the first port of call. Halberdiers do make any sort of melee engagement that much more complicated for Ulfang, but if you can take them out of the equation with the best tool you have for dealing with them, it becomes far more complex for Boar to start bullying your melee. Hunters of Lothland are probably going to try and counter skirmish into those Croatani foragers, but Ulfang being aggressive and preventing them from moving far enough forwards to do that. So a little bit of a clumsily executed advance this from the House of Boar. The initial skirmishing phase, as you might expect, was going in their favour, but they haven't really done their thing. Ravagers of Himring berserk for a second there. So I think that's the impetuous trait being made a little bit more pronounced. Losing control of your units and attacking. They are shaking, the Ravagers. And that's almost certainly as a result of those fiery projectiles from the Salamandrine Guard. Yeah, those javelins. I mean, all of the slowly built good work that Boar did earlier on has largely been undone, and we are now going to be operating on far more of a level playing field once again. But then, I suppose that has to be the upshot of being a throwing projectile focused faction. rather than an archer one. It allows you to do that damage a little bit more quickly. Again, the halberdiers are moving further forwards. Although this one, the angle is not quite on the forager's side. Ravagers of Himring do move forward. They're already wavering. I mean, so far we haven't really seen any of the really high-end Ulfang units. We saw some despoilers over here. Might be a little bit more... the Amberona Honor Guard are in here as well. Another unit that we actually missed in the composition phase, which is unfortunate because they are the strongest unit of infantry the House of Boar have to offer. Far more defensive than the Sons of Ulfang. And unfortunately their armour does mean the Ravagers of Himring are not really going to be able to lay down their effectiveness, combined with the phalanx formation of the halberdiers. It's not going to end all that well for them. Or marauders moving forward. Then again, this is looking a little bit more like it now from the House of Boar. The initial phases there were looking a little bit suspect, but they have done far better since then. Huskalar of Thargelion, again Haladin trying to do a little bit more softening up of the enemy before moving in. And they've got to be a little bit careful they don't get too close, otherwise a counter charge could come in if Angband feel as though they could make it. I can't help but notice as well that the Haladin's little icon there is the same one as Angband. Very close range, of course, these axe throwers, so they do have to put themselves in harm's way just that little bit more. But again, any throwing axe that does hit a halberdier is very likely to result in their demise. And just in time to see the first wave of a melee engagement from this side, the House of Feanor doing their thing now as well. The Footmen of Amras colliding with what's largely Spearguard for now, but as soon as the Ironshod halberdiers shuffle forward, it will be a little bit more tricky for Feanor to establish total dominance on the front line. Archers of Amrod moving forward as well, out of ammunition, but still a solid wedge of armour in melee as well. Same sort of thing over here as well. One Footman of Amras, followed in by some out of ammunition archers. No halberdiers on this side, but they are going up against the Tormentors of the Iron Crown, which are a latent armour-piercing unit, so they may not have the range of the halberdiers, but they are a really good quality line infantry unit. And it hasn't started all that well. I mean, the Thanes of Ulfang are also here in support, so numbers-wise, actually, this defensive line should hold fairly firm. So they are going to have to commit a little bit more to this if they want to see results, Feanor. The poison projectiles of the Fangs of the Faithless as well. I mean, it's a fairly difficult task to rout House of Feanor, but not impossible if you do start to gain the edge. Are they going after the Rangers? No, they're going after the front line, interestingly enough. A combination of the fiery projectiles and the poison. If you are going to rout the elves, this will be how you do it. Though the heavy armour will mean that the amount of damage they actually do is going to be far more mitigated. That's why I'm a little bit surprised they didn't go after the Rangers. Mythern and Tolgalen, I mean, pretty quickly this battle has exploded into life now. The Mythern represent a very good target for the Uroloki as well. They are pretty well armoured for an elven faction. Well, there goes the House of Boar's general. Unfortunately, caught in melee against the Ulfang units, the Mythern's maces are not really going to be doing what they will have hoped. Footmen of Amras ready to move forward, but for the time being, the defenders will be content with the situation. So, yeah, I mean, the routing of these units, which were under a lot of pressure now as a result of the loss of that general, clear to see. Amberona Honor Guard are routing as well, which is surprising. Loss of the general is far more pronounced in Silmarillion, and committing the Honor Guard to melee early with that quality in mind is all well and good, but in the end it hasn't really worked out for the House of Boar, and now some of the squishier Hunts of Lothland also on the receiving end of the despoilers. So despite a pretty rough start, the House of Ulfang have really gained the upper hand over here. The House of Boar are also the first ones in, so maybe the disparate nature of this attack has also hurt the attackers as a whole. The House of Boar operating on a far more frantic schedule, for example, than the Haladin, who have still not moved in. And at this stage, of course, you could make the argument that they need to be a little bit more considered with the House of Boar flagging, but I mean, they can't afford to allow the same sort of fate to befall Ossriand and Feanor. I do think the Haladin do need to pick up the pace. There's always, I think, a little bit more of an emphasis on the player that isn't moving as quickly as their allies. It does have the feeling of leaving your allies, or hanging your allies out to dry a little bit. marching into Angband's teeth is not exactly a thrilling prospect. Orders of Himring trying to surround over here. They won't last too long, however. The combination of Mythern and Footman of Amras over here, very good combination. Well, good combination of thoroughly defensive line infantry unit and then one with more offensive tendencies. Hunts of Rathloriel moving forward, rangers as well. Can the attackers start to use their own throwing projectiles? We've seen Ulfang on the other side of the map use them to devastating effect. The attackers may need to see a little bit more of that if they are going to have success in this fight, and you can see this, all of the Angband spears and halberds doing very nicely. Agile Ravagers in reserve as well if they should need a little bit more of a leg up armour piercing wise. Skirmishers of Rathloriel out of ammunition as well. I mean, this is also the sort of thing which is going to be a little bit harder to keep track of. How much ammunition especially the attackers have left, with many of their archers still positioned outside of the settlement. Fangs of the Faithless in a good position here. Again, that or those poison projectiles that they're using could yet prove to be extremely important. Still not a huge amount of movement over here. They do have the foragers still, Marauders of Himring in a good position. The thralls have been moved off, but this so far has really been the only engagement that this side of the field has had, and it's a completely unsurprising one, but it's also a completely unimportant one really for the defenders. That's exactly the sort of role that the thralls are always brought to do. I don't know how much ammunition that the Archers of Anrod had to expend doing that, and everything falls silent over on this front line over here, which is never a good sign if you're the attacker. If you get completely repelled from one of your attacks, you have to start from your beginnings, and as much as there are a good amount of dead Ulfang forces over here, not enough of them are of the high quality nature that you see many of the House of Boar's deaths are. Amberona Honor Guard and the Halberdiers of Lothlin in particular represent significant losses. Can the Eastern men over here still contribute in a big way? Having a look at some of these units, I'm not so sure, to be honest. Most of them are lighter in nature. They still have Ballistae as well, but they have one last attack in them, and it's not going to be of the highest level of quality either. They still do have some Honor Guard, but yeah, no general. Meanwhile, still over here, the patient approach being employed by the Haladin. And in all fairness, Angband's micro over here and the attention being paid is probably a little bit more limited given the larger assault that Feanor led over on the other choke point, but how significant are these losses going to be later on when the Haladin do decide to move forward in earnest? Still a fair amount of, well, I mean, Rangers of Halavorn moving backwards, the Uraloki moving forward. I mean, again, you can see from this, the way that this engagement has gone, the attack is being forced backwards. The Uraloki almost certainly being a big part of that. They will fall away fairly quickly now, though, bloodied as they are, and they were probably the instigator in why this front line has moved backwards. As elephant class units as well, stuff like the Spear Host of Galleon will do bonus damage to them, so the Uraloki do fall. But this does give a little bit more room for, again, the Froatani Foragers. Despoilers of Dor Caranthia moving forward, although the armour of the Footmen of Amras will help to do the business against them. I do like it when the defenders get aggressive, however, when they see an opportunity to go for the throat, and that is certainly what is happening here. Again, the Angband morale is a little bit concerning, and I don't know if Angband have the ability to sustain this sort of thing, because they do also need to look after the southern approach, where the Haladin still lurk with intent. Defenders of Aglon, that extra damage, and also very significantly the armour piercing on the Urfinan Tower is going to be very, very useful against the Angband units, which make up the vast majority of this little counter-attack. And the Thanes of Ulfang, defeat seems certain for them. So I think this is perhaps where the momentum flips back the other way, but can they reorganise themselves here, the defenders? They have enough, actually, to reorganise themselves. I mean, they're sending forward more units, but I don't think they're really going to gain anything from doing so. They may gain a little bit more time for the marauders and the foragers to throw a few more projectiles in, but I mean, this is where the Fangs of the Faithless, their defensive attributes may come to the fore, but as we mentioned at the start, their melee prowess in terms of dealing damage is a little bit more limited, and defenders of Aglorn and Otorn Mighty Mo are the units they're facing off against, some of the very best Feanor have to offer, so they should be swept aside, really. Hunters of Rathloriel taking more hits. And the Mounted Company of Karufin moving forward again, being used as those standard javelins. If there is to be a transitional phase in the battle as well, the Mounted Company could start running roughshod over quite a few of the squishier units that do remain, and that's exactly what Balagost is trying to do with his cavalry now. Again, they can't afford to stay in sustained melee, but this is where, again, when you see the sight of cavalry running roughshod over a front line like that, this is the way into the settlement that the attackers have been waiting for. I mean, Ondo Hyando revealing themselves and the Randirim, so the specialty projectiles of the elves, and the green elves are far and away over on this choke point anyway now, the more numerous faction, and they will be hoping to take full advantage of that. More units on the way across, however. With reinforcements on the way across, that should finally be the green light for the Halidin to start moving forwards. May also be getting closer to the time where this little detachment of the Feanor army also starts to put some pressure on this position down here. The Halidin, the catapult from the House of Boar on the way across, as well as the Salamandrine Guard, so trying to give the Halidin the best possible chance. More of the Huskarlar continuing to fire in. I mean, at this point, the damage that Angband have taken over here over time is substantial. One by one, the throwing projectile units have come forward. I mean, they still haven't, between them, been able to completely destroy a single unit, but considering the fact that Angband have taken heavy, heavy losses elsewhere, adding on top of that and then maybe moving forward everything you have left with the Halidin, is that the path to an attacker victory here? Clearly, Alf thinks so, otherwise they would have moved forwards far sooner than they have done. And this is the problem as well when you consider that there's still the presence of the House of Boar over here, the detachment of the Feanor army, still this assault continues. They can't afford to abandon any one position without abandoning them all, the defenders. And if they do abandon them all, it gives a lot of potential opportunities, especially for something like the Mounted Company of Karufin over there, to get some good damage done as the defenders try to retreat. Meanwhile, still the Earthen Tower here. Those two-handed axes continue to do the business. Meanwhile, that whistling sound effect is indeed the Ironshot Arbalist, so the crossbows are trying to do their thing. The Salamandrine Guard as well, more cavalry, this time from the House of Boar, who are more now, I think, they've kept a token presence over on the front line. They were pressurising earlier, but they are sending over units to try and act in more of a supporting role for their allies at this point, facilitate an advance elsewhere. Scouts of Gellion taking a good amount of damage there, Marauders of Himring hitting them in the rear. Some rangers of Hellvorn managing to push through the enemy lines and engage the Ironshot Arbalists. It will, at least temporarily, prevent them from firing. Skirmishers of Rathloriel also moving forward. I mean, a fair amount of these units are out of ammunition skirmishers, which is a little bit concerning. Stuff like the Tormentors of the Iron Crown will be just fine at withstanding the kind of damage they can chuck out. They have to come across some of the stronger units that the attackers still have, it might be a different story, but also backed up by a very different kind of unit in the Despoilers of Dorcaranthia, but again, that melding of strengths is often where we see teams at their best. Salamandrine Guard making their way in. Torments of the Iron Crown routing. Again, if you were to think one side or the other is more likely to rout, you would say the defenders. Angband and Ulfang, neither of which renowned for having universally good morale. The Iron Crown units you'd expect to be a little bit sturdier, but the situation perhaps is turning on them a little bit. The Despoilers of Dorcaranthia are being left to their own devices to try and hold on now. Here we go. Iron Drakes of Angband moving in, but finally we do have a melee engagement from the Halidin. The time is now. Swear to Brothia and Rigsware moving as one. And so far, Angband's front line holds on without too many issues. Dowerwader of Athelbrandia represents something a little bit more scary in melee for Angband to have to contend with. Attacking catapult as well from the House of Boar. Bulldogs are over here. I mean, Thralls of Angband also firing in. This is the kind of warfare that the Halidin are far less attuned to than Angband. Catapult going after the Bulldogs. Tiny amount of friendly fire, but mostly hitting Angband there, so worthwhile. They are going to need to be prepared to continue to send forward the Swear to Brothia to keep this attack going, I think. We have the Skaldmire as well. I think those are armour-piercing throwing axes, if I'm not mistaken. Javelins and throwing axes still the ones doing the vast amount of the damage dealing here. And there were 2 units of the Dowerwader as well, so moving forward one initially and then saving the other one for later does make an amount of sense. Swear to Brothia, though, defeat is a distinct possibility. I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? The Halberdiers were still healthy enough. They took damage, but not enough damage, you would suggest, and this is why the Halidin work far better in a support capacity than they do having to do everything in a siege battle on their own. Huskar are moving forward to keep the front line ticking over. The javelins continue to rain down. But again, those Iron Drakes being used to pretty devastating effect. The unit of Salamandrine Guard. What are they going to do then? Thralls, out of ammunition, scurrying back further within the settlement. Is the House of Boar going to re-energise its own assault? They could give it a go, but they would probably lose still. Lose fairly fast as well. On this front line as well. Feanor, I mean, when they were going to move forward here, they were going to have to move forward with everything they had, but the quality they have over here, unlike the Halidin, Feanor are much more at home contesting this kind of ground with Angband. Especially those accursed of Alqualonde. I mean, that's the kind of unit all of these heavy swordsmen Feanor have in general, as much as the Tormentors of the Iron Crown can try and level the playing field with armour piercing. Overall, the melee defense and just the melee offense as well of these heavy swords is going to be more than enough to give Angband the business, and unlike previously where we saw them being backed up by the Thanes of Ulfang as a pretty significant thing, Thanes of Ulfang will be very displeased to see the amount of heavy elven swordsmen they're being tasked with facing off against. Who is that then? Is that the Green Elves General? Or is it the Halidin's General? Was that the Halidin General? Elf Hunters. Meanwhile, well, I mean, not that it really matters if it was the Halidin General. Another General flees? Surely not. Otor? How peculiar. Anyway, Iron Drake's getting engaged in melee, so coming forward with fair amount of aggression now, the Haladin, but perhaps it was because they saw they had a pretty hefty numbers advantage. Angband have been having to do a lot of heavy lifting against Feanor, whereas the Haladin had a whole army to utilise. Actually using the slower approach in melee terms probably did help Angband for longer than it really ought to have. And now we're seeing a fair amount of the Angband frontline crumble. The Bulldogs won't, of course. They will fight to the bitter end, and there's really nothing the Haladin have that can tackle the Bulldogs one-to-one. They'll have to either utterly overwhelm them or use their throwing projectiles to finish them off. Or the Salamanders can continue to charge into them like so. And the Haladin do still have that extra unit of Dawawada. The Ulfadin are still here as well. At least one unit of them. I don't know. Oof. There goes the Angband general. Stabbed by an axe. Unsurprisingly, the Thralls are routing as well. That's probably a series of events which is fairly telling in the battle as a whole. I don't know if the defenders have the manpower anymore to be able to withstand the fact that the Haladin are still reasonably healthy. This is the cue that the House of Boar have been waiting for. They're going to move forwards. And you can see that the defenders now are going to try to retreat, presumably to the centre of the settlement, by far and away the best last stand. High-shod Ravagers. Interesting unit to save to the end, but I guess a lot of their standard heavy infantry was being utilised to try and keep Feanor at arm's length. And it is going to be primarily Ulfang that are trying to pull out a victory here for the defenders. Angband, with their disparate focus, had an awful lot of losses to sustain, whereas Ulfang, most of what we saw of them was more focused, so they've been able to keep themselves in slightly better shape. Some of their units have been left behind. However, interestingly though, there are some Sons of Ulfang over on this front line over here who, they're not going berserk. It's the Ravagers that are around them that are going berserk. I mean, in all fairness, at the very least, the Sons of Ulfang will give a far better accounting of themselves, and actually the numbers being what they are, they actually seem to be, at the very least, fighting Feanor to a standstill, although I think that will stabilise itself again, especially with some Rangers of Halavorn moving in, offering more numbers to the front line, even if they themselves will be pretty poor in melee. Although the general does fall as a result. We've seen how devastating the loss of a general can be when the House of Boar lost theirs, but how long will these guys remain in melee for? The elves still struggling to crush them underfoot too quickly. Mounted Company of Karufin were going to move in, but I mean the ballista crew there, they are limited in number, but two-handed spears are going to be pretty damn effective against cavalry like that. And they can't afford to just hang out here in full view of those javelins because they're taking a lot of damage there. Mounted Company of Karufin, I don't know how useful they're still going to be. We saw them be effective at turning the tide over here. There was a real ebb and flow to this choke point here. Started off with Feanor and Angband fighting on equal footing, then Angband forced them back and counterattacked, and then Feanor and Ossriand did the same. The other initial fights were a little bit more straightforward. The House of Boar and the House of Haleth now linking up with one another. It is going to be interesting to see the House of Haleth have to be the ones really that take the lead. Yeah, the announcer was about to say that he doesn't really fancy their chances. And that's fair enough, I suppose. I mean, this is a very narrow defensive position here. Can you go into this little area? I don't think so, the gate's closed, but it's a narrow enough defensive position. But unfortunately, well, unfortunately to a certain extent, a lot of what the defenders have left up here is shock infantry, more aggressive infantry, not really designed for holding a line and fighting in that way. But they can't really afford to try and counterattack down the hill at this point, I don't think. There's still cavalry running around after all. Any charges the Mounted Company of Karufin are allowed to get from here would be utterly unacceptable from a defending perspective. Randirim, Hondo Kyando are another very dangerous unit, of course, armour-piercing archers. Relatively few and far between in Silmarillion, but perhaps unsurprisingly the Green Elves are one such force. Dual-wielding axes in melee as well. Are they going to start firing? They're in a position where they could. They could go after the Fangs of the Faithless, not the worst thing to try and use your armour-piercing on. Elf Hunters. Hunters of Rathloril, they're not going to be able to save this ballista at this point, I don't think. Actually, there's still 96 of the crew remaining, it's just the actual artillery pieces that have been left behind. If the attackers really wanted to, they could prevent the defenders from getting this ballista back. And again, I don't really know how useful this ballista is going to be. They can't retreat it all the way into the heart of this defence because they're not going to have the angle with which to use it properly. It's actually fairly impressive that the Fangs of the Faithless still have ammunition left. Poison not going to result in routing just now, I wouldn't have thought. Can they salvage this artillery piece? Just taking stock as well of what Feanor and Ossriand have left. I mean, Feanor unsurprisingly had to be the ones to do a lot of the initial work, but having a look at this, I mean, I don't think they have a huge amount remaining to them. And have a look at this, there's only 4 of the Accursed of Alqualonde, so those Sons of Ulfang really did blunt what Feanor have left. And again, Ossriand are going to have to take most of the take the lead here, I would have thought. Maybe Feanor can still do it, but a lot of these units are still pretty depleted. So yeah, just generally it's going to be a case of, can the Haladin see the attackers over the line, I think. All of their allies are in various states of disrepair. And the defenders have managed to set up a pretty nasty defensive strong point in the middle of the map. Artillery could still have its impact on the outcome of the game. Wanderers of Thargelion getting into a decent position. And again, good choice of target as well. Going after the despoilers. And still that ballista was not able to save itself. The fickle mistress that is the pathfinding of medieval 2 artillery. Defenders of Aglon and Footmen of Amras, I mean, they're moving forward here to make sure that that artillery crew doesn't want to come back down the hill here. I don't know if the attackers are ready to begin another assault in earnest, though, if that's what Feanor was intending. I don't know if the Green Elves are ready to move in with them, and more to the point, I don't know if their allies are ready to start moving in on the other side either. Haratani foragers in place. Crew as well. This will be the ultimate litmus test, I guess, of the Haladin's credentials in a battlefield situation that doesn't really suit them. This has been a long old affair so far, and we will be entering into the final phases now. But yeah, the Feanor are not waiting. I have to say, if the defenders do go on to win this, a big factor in that will be the fact that the attackers have not really been in sync with one another all that much. You could argue that in a situation like this it doesn't really matter too much because the defenders need to keep a solid presence on both sides anyway, so it's not as if they can fully focus on one side and then fully focus on the other. But what it does mean is if an assault fails, like it is already doing so over on this side, later on the defenders can then fully focus on one side, and that can be the difference between victory and defeat, so we'll have to wait and see. It will be, I think, fairly impressive if the defenders do go on to win this. I mean, obviously being outnumbered by an army isn't the easiest thing to overcome, especially when you consider that Ulfang themselves are not really the most defensively inclined of factions, and that is the role they've been asked to take on a lot of the time here. They've done so with their own unique flavour, I suppose, but Randirim and Tolgalen, I mean, they are a body-piercing unit. And they will most certainly accept killing off a few more Sons of Ulfang, probably the most dangerous singular unit that still remains. If I had one criticism, it would be that the Sons of Ulfang and the Despoilers of Dor-Caranthia now look incredibly similar. You have to really look a little bit more closely to see it's the Sons of Ulfang. And yes, they do have those serrated blades, which does set them apart, but still. Foragers as well. We do have an engagement over here. Freyswear of Brethel. Haladin trying to use their own archers now. Hunters of Lothland finishing off that advance party of Hroetani foragers that Malcolm sent down the hill. Bit of a footnote of an engagement that, but is that a sign of things to come? I mean, this is going to be the more important of the two sides, I believe. It is, I think, quite telling as well that the Freyswear have revealed themselves now, so that implies that the Haladin still have access to their full array of archer ammunition, so we may see another fairly lengthy phase of trying to soften the enemy up before then moving in, which is probably for the best, considering how the Haladin, while they were victorious over there, initially it was looking a little bit dicey for them. It's not the most important units in the world, but everything is going to be important. Well, everything's going to have to play its part. Put Ulfang here. Ondo Hyando. What are they going after? The Ravagers? I mean, I guess Angband are the force which are more armoured. You may be better off going after the Spear Guard though. You know, shields are pointing in the right direction and all that, but... Orders of Himring. It's a lot of shock infantry, isn't it? Again, damage-wise, that may be to their benefit. I mean, here we can see the Iron Drakes. I mean, if the Freyswear see them, they should try and just overwhelm them. Yes, they're heavily armoured, but you can't afford for the Iron Drakes to have round 2 against you, put it that way. Hunters of Lothland taking more hits. I have to wonder how many shots the Iron Drakes still have left in them, although as a depleted unit, of course, you can make that ammunition go a little further. Freyswear taking hits now as well. This is all building towards another full assault. Once again, Feanor have reorganised themselves, but they're going to have to wait until Ossriand are ready to move in with them, otherwise they're just going to meet the same fate once again. Despoilers moving in. They don't have the benefit of the same armour piercing as the Sons of Ulfang, but trying to get their charge off. I don't know if that was the most effective charge ever, but the attempt was made. Although the Footmen of Amrast will now feast, I think. Spear Guards. Interesting that the Angband unit has moved forward in an attempt to assist. They're going to try... Well, they routed off those Footmen of Amrast. I guess the loss of the Feanor general earlier. The spectre of that still hanging over the Crimson-clad elves. And as much as the Hunters of Rathloriel move forward in an attempt to support it, it's more of a token effort, if anything. Hunters of Rathloriel, not the scariest of units that the Green Elves have, although you have to say there's not a huge amount that the Green Elves can send forward. There's some Ulfadin from the Haladin. The Ulfadin of Ethelbrandia could still be actually one of the best ways in which these fairly solid defensive lines could yet be undone fairly quickly. The Haladin are going to be aggressive in that way. It's by far their most effective tool for doing so. Hroetani foragers. Defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. Foragers as well. Arrows getting ballooned in. Is this it as well? A fair amount of Sweardebrothia moving forward, and that would suggest that the Halidin are getting ready for a more heavy metal style of assault. After all, if all of these Sweardebrothia fall, they don't really have... I mean, the dismounted Mardrouts are okay at doing that in melee, but they're very small as units go. And unsurprisingly, seeing all of these heavier units move forward, the Ironshod Ravagers are going to make their way over here as well to offer a little bit of armor-piercing bite on the front lines. Oof. The artillery giving the business to the defenders, the Iron Drakes giving the business to the attackers. Both sides feeling the heat now. The advance a little bit messy, the defence a little bit scattered. Neither side getting fully what they want out of this, so it'll be interesting to see what way this starts to develop. I don't think they got a charge off the Ironshod Ravagers, which does take away a little bit from their effectiveness, but the armor-piercing hits in melee will still be enough to really worry the Sweardebrothia, and also friendly fire from that catapult could yet end up routing this lot. In comes the Cav. Cavalry and artillery. An attempt perhaps for psychological warfare, induce panic in the ranks of the enemy. Feanor's morale's been in trouble, and with Angband's general gone as well, you'd have to assume theirs is too. And the Ironshod Ravagers are shaken still. Despoilers of Dorcaranthia, meanwhile, despite being more depleted, still holding firm and steady. Again, defeat seems certain. And the Iron Drakes continue to do their thing. And yeah, this is looking pretty bad. I mean, they're not routing, they're of their own accord trying to retreat here, but this does go to show this wasn't really the best of moves. A large part of it is those Iron Drakes as well. The Friesware should really have tried to finish them off. Normally I would discourage units going after something so depleted, but when it's something which is capable of doing the kind of damage the Iron Drakes are, I think you have to finish them off completely, otherwise you're opening yourself up for more pain later. The advantage the Halidin built up earlier on, however, does give them a bit more of margin for error, and the Sweardebrothia is skewering their way through more of the units. Meanwhile, over on the other side, no such renewed assault has happened yet. Once again, Feanor going to be doing their thing. The Ulfang also going to be moving forward. Something needs to happen over on this side as well, I think, on Dokiando. Feanor, if they move forward again, they're just going to get routed very quickly again. Their morale is in shambles at this point, and there's enough over here that they could be routed pretty quickly, including a fairly healthy unit of the Sons of Ulfang. Sweardebrothia joined by the dismounted Mardrouts. Mardrouts, I think, defensively are even more accomplished, though, of course, as spears and a smaller unit of spears as well. Their ability to do that damage, as we mentioned, is probably not going to be there. Still, the announcer doesn't fancy the defenders' chances. Do the Halidin numbers simply prove too much in the end? Cavalry is still there, dismounted Mardrout throwing javelins in. House of Boar still has, by the standards of this stage of the battle, the House of Boar still has a fair amount left in it as well. After their crumbling on their initial front line, they've been taking far more of a back seat, but it does mean that here in the later stages they can play more of an active part. Those Hunters of Lothland getting grilled. A debacle, is it? I think the defenders have played pretty well, in all honesty. I think you can point to a few things they could have done a little bit differently, perhaps, but I mean, overall, I think the fact that they've been outnumbered by an army and it's this close is pretty impressive. I've got more criticisms of how the attackers have decided to approach things than the defenders, put it that way. But that natural advantage that attackers tend to have. More Falksmen doing their thing. There were Sons of Ulfang on this front line as well. I saw some of the serrated blades being held aloft, but fairly depleted units of them, I would suggest. Thanes of Ulfang, Marauders, still the cavalry trying to be used as more of a bludgeon. I think the Falksmen have a slight anti-cavalry bonus in melee as well, so even if they don't, the base damage is still enough to the point where the cavalry really ought to reconsider its life choices if it wants to live to see the end of the battle. Though if you are trying to just force the issue at this later stage, that is fine also. Frotani Foragers. They are ready to move forward once the opportunity presents itself. I'm a little bit disappointed we haven't seen the Ulfadin move forward actually. Just try your luck on both sides of the field. In all fairness, the Mounted Company of Carufin, for once we're seeing a unit of melee cavalry actually perform in melee without melting with instant effect. I suppose that's what happens when you don't have any dedicated anti-cavalry units on your front line, but even still, like, the way that I've been used to seeing cavalry for so long is very, very fragile and kind of disappointing when you get them involved up close like this. Haskala now moving forward, another wave. I mean, I did notice in the background there were 3 or so units of them lined up, so that is what is being committed forward now along with the other unit of dismounted Mardrout. But I mean, this is kind of approaching the last of what the Halidin have left over here. Can the defenders dig their way out of this yet? The Haskala are not the best unit in melee, and indeed they're still taking punishment at the hands of those Iron Drakes. Dawawada still there, as well as those dismounted Mardrout, so still some of the upper echelon of what the Halidin have in their army is active on the field. Don't know how much of the Mardrout will be left after the cooking they're receiving. Another unit of the Despoilers being sent over here as well, and in all fairness, the Despoilers should be very, very good against most of what the Halidin have to offer. And I say most because the Dawawada should be able to outlast them, as should the Mardrout with their armour. But are they in high enough numbers? Ulfang certainly still have the Falksmen to continue. Well, over on this side, aha, we are now seeing an advance. Sons of Ulfang being committed forward with instant effect, and we do have the Ulfadin who have gone berserk. The Randirim moving forward as well, what remains of Feanor routing once again. I mean, I have to say that the announcer doesn't seem all that enamoured with their chances, but the kind of units they have left, the amount of damage all of the Ulfang Falksmen are going to be able to do, I'm not unconvinced that the defenders can win this. Those Sons of Ulfang are, at this point in time, I think the scariest unit left on the field. The Bulldogs and the Otorn as defensive units go have long since passed. You could argue the Iron Drakes, they've been a very key part of proceedings. 73 Sons of Ulfang though. This hasn't gone all that well, has it? The Ulfadin, I mean, in all fairness, the Ulfadin may have that extra hit point, and as Berserker class units they can do an awful lot of damage, but melee defense low, and once their hit points are gone, no armor either. This means that Falksmen are one of the ideal units for dealing with them. I think Ulfang have shown that very nicely here. We were interested in seeing them, and before we could really see them properly, Ulfang have already got the better of them. It's just whether or not there's another wave forthcoming, because if there is, I don't know if they're going to be able to. I mean, the Elf Hunters are back down here once again, I think trying to reclaim their artillery piece, but they're going to be overwhelmed by cavalry and the Wanderers of Thargelion that are down here. This side, the Catapult. House of Boar now maybe will have to take the lead on a lot of this. The Amberona Honour Guard. First time they've really been recommitted since the loss of their general. Their presence on the front line is fairly substantial now. The Mardrout are gone, but now the Dawawada and the Amberona Honour Guard, the bodyguard tier units of the two good aligned human factions here, will they be enough to deal with the numbers of all of these Ravagers? I don't think they will, you know. The Ravagers and the Despoilers. that damage. I don't think they have the... don't think they have the numbers, but that catapult is perhaps a bit of a wild card here, because one good hit into the centre of the Iron-shod Ravagers could send them all running, and without the Ravagers, without that armour-piercing bite they offer, I don't think the defenders will be able to hold on to this front line over here, and that could start the domino effect. Still, the Iron Drakes have ammo. The depleted nature of that unit actually has probably done them a good service. It's allowed Stewie an easier path to being more conservative with his ammunition. Skaldmire moving forward, projectiles still on them, attempting to be grilled. Again, morale is also going to be a big factor here at this late stage. 35 Sons of Ulfang. After their victory over here, although they are going to have to try and be victorious once again because another assault is coming forward, and yeah, I think this was always going to be the thing. If another wave was forthcoming, I think the defenders would fall apart, and another wave is coming. It's not of the highest quality, but even still, I think the numbers the defenders are working with at this point are just too depleted. Freisware and all manner of archers that are out of ammunition. I mean, the Dragoons are actually going to be decent enough in melee, the Salamandrine Guard as well, doing their thing. Sons of Ulfang I don't think are here in high enough numbers anymore to be able to repel this assault once again. And javelins as well. Yeah. The announcer has been consistent, and it's now when I think I can probably start to agree with him. The addition of the Dawawada and the Amberona Honor Guard on this front line has also helped stabilise things. I mean, I still don't know if they're going to be outright victorious over here, but they've avoided what looked to be a fairly chastening loss over on this choke point with the committal of that quality that they had in the back pocket. Catapult's also been fairly important, but basically everything has been committed now. So it's far easier to sort of gain an appreciation for what the situation actually is. And still the Iron Drakes getting a little bit of friendly fire there, but mostly hitting their own man, and at this point taking wild risks is probably called for. The Salamanders forcing their way through as well. That attacking cavalry has been a good call, and again, ranged cavalry, so they could be used in multiple different ways. The Mounted Company of Karufin and Salamandrine Guard are also tanky enough up close and personal that they have been that Swiss Army knife that was needed. Right from the earliest stages. Axemen of Lothlin moving forward. And the Ondo Hyando as well. Not a huge margin of victory this though, by any means. It could very easily have gone the other way. And based on how morale works in Silmarillion as well, that's far easier to picture. Collapsing morale is the cause of many a loss. Sons of Ulfang still fighting, not locked morale, but doing their best to fight to the bitter end. Yeah, and that's going to be the end of them. So I think those Sons of Ulfang may very well be the last ones left standing. Fitting. Ulfang's mightiest warriors are the last ones to be defending the palace. The Salamanders as well. It's also rather interesting that the House of Boar are the ones that are playing a big part in finishing them off, considering it was really the initial engagements in the battle were between the House of Boar and the House of Ulfang. Both factions previously made up the Easterlings. And that is going to be that. 10% the difference. And you consider, I mean, there is a fair amount of routing as well. Percentages are a little bit more difficult to follow in Silmarillion as a result of that. There's a fair bit of that, but still, A lot of these units as well are out of ammo skirmishers that were committed late on, numbers-wise. Most of them Haladin. Still a few from the House of Boar as well. Yondo Hyando give the Green Elves a presence here as well. Feanor, interestingly enough, the ones to be effectively completely gone. So yeah, that was a rather interesting return to Silmarillion, wasn't it? It's quite rare that I get sent these big set-piece sieges in Silmarillion because of the amount of smaller updates it tends to go through, and like I mentioned at the start, we do have a tendency to see pitch battles where what tweaking on the balance of the game is a little bit more to the forefront, although I think those days may be coming to a close because with this variant of the game, the campaign is starting to take more and more precedent. Which implies that we're going to be seeing more updates on that side of things from now. So multiplayer-wise, replay-wise, maybe we'll see a little bit more of this now because they won't have to download updates that change the balancing of the infantry and the like too much more now. Having said that, the next Silmarillion battle I'm going to show is going to be a 1v1 pitch, and it is going to be again between the House of Ulfang and the Blessed Realm of Feanor, just to give an example of what two very different approaches to a battle in that situation goes like, and that will probably be the midweek battle next week. So a bit more Silmarillion there. But maybe we'll see this kind of set-piece battle a little bit more in Silmarillion now, and I'd be, of course, more than happy to show it in the midweek slots in my schedule if I get them. But yeah, big thanks to Leech for sending this to me in that regard. But let's see what did the damage for the two Ulfang armies. They didn't have the advantage, I suppose, of the huge amount of damage that the Iron Drakes must have accrued. But still, plenty of units getting over 100. I mean, to be fair, there were two human factions as well as the elven factions on the field, so varying qualities of kills, I suppose. But 180 on the Sons of Ulfang, they did well. The Fangs of the Faithless were also very useful. The poison, I mean, considering how important a factor morale was in this battle, I think the poison projectiles will have done something at the very least. Marauders, we saw the throwing projectiles do very well against the House of Boar, and just in general, Ulfang is always going to be at least partially reliant on them. Croatani Foragers as well. A little bit further down again, Sons of Ulfang breaking over 150 kills, which they are a shock infantry unit with a limited shelf life. As far as a bodyguard unit goes, they're not one of the most resilient, even if they do have an impressive amount of damage, so they do need to get their killing done pretty quickly, generally speaking. I was impressed by the Despoilers of Dor Caranthia as well, though a lot of the time they were up against units that they are going to do quite well against, especially against the likes of the Haladin. They did okay even against the likes of Feanor, even if they were kind of on the back foot in those engagements because of the extreme armour that Feanor have. A lot of the more shielded units obviously getting more conservative kill count, so 112 on some Thanes isn't too bad at all. I think the Ballistae are probably the one area where the defenders will feel a little bit disappointed. I don't think their artillery was utilised to an extremely effective degree. We may have missed some examples of it, but the fact they had to leave one artillery piece behind and weren't able to bring it into the final stand, that can definitely be the difference between victory and defeat. Again, morale can play just as big a part in that as the amount of damage a ballista can do. Meanwhile, I think the attacking artillery was used fairly effectively. Obviously attacking archers as well. So again, it's one of those things of small margins. Any close battle like this can be changed around in small margins, but for the defenders, that's really the main thing that I would say. If they were able to save that ballista, maybe they could have used it to really good effect, especially on this side with the Iron Drakes. In conjunction with that, I don't think the Haladin and the House of Boar would have really been able to do anything. And that would have allowed them to focus on the other side, and then maybe they could have formed a united front against what remained of their human adversaries after defeating the elven ones a little bit earlier. But yes, we will never know now. But yeah, hopefully, like I said, a bit more of this to come in the future. So big thank you to Leech, big thank you to Belagost as well for sending me the correct files to get up to date with this one. Obviously the engine overhauls now a part of Silmarillion as well, so interesting to see what benefits that will offer too. Big thanks to all the players for being a part of this battle replay. I hope you enjoyed this.